They say that rain washes away the secrets of the world, but some secrets refuse to die. I've never really been one for ghost stories. In fact, I used to laugh at the thought of curses, haunted places, and all those tales people cling to when they need a reason for the unexplainable. But there are things I can't quite shake from my mind, fragments of memory that surface each time the rain falls. It's as if that quiet rhythm of water on the ground, that familiar tapping at the window, brings everything back. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Now, back to my story. It was last autumn. I had moved into a small house at the edge of town, a place I was told had history, although no one seemed eager to share it with me. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet place where I could be alone with my thoughts, away from the noise and busyness of city life. But even on the first night, there was a heaviness in the air, something I couldn't quite explain. The rain started soon after I arrived, a soft drizzle that turned into a steady downpour by evening. I remember feeling oddly calm at first, listening to it fall outside as I unpacked. But as the hours passed, that feeling shifted. It wasn't something I could pinpoint. No creaking floors or whispers in the dark. Just an overwhelming sense that I wasn't truly alone in that house. And then, the lights began to flicker. A faint pulse, dimming and brightening, almost in time with the rain outside. I told myself it was just faulty wiring or maybe the storm. But as the light flickered, shadows stretched across the walls, shapes that didn't seem to belong. Every flash, every shadow felt like something or someone was trying to reach out. I thought about calling someone a friend maybe, but each time I reached for my phone, I felt embarrassed, like maybe it was just my nerves or the newness of the place getting to me. Still, there was this pressure, something I couldn't shake, something that seemed to settle deeper as the rain grew heavier. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired, that maybe the rain was playing tricks on my mind. But when I looked out the window, I saw something that made my heart stop. Through the sheets of rain, down by the tree line at the edge of the yard, there was a light. It flickered faintly, like an old lantern, swinging slowly back and forth. I stared at it for what felt like hours, half expecting it to fade away or for the rain to blur it out. But it didn't disappear. If anything, it seemed to draw closer, each slow swing pulling it just a little nearer to the house. And the closer it came, the colder the air around me felt. I could feel it even inside, and then just as suddenly as it appeared, the light vanished, leaving nothing but the rain and that empty stretch of darkness outside. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that the shadows, the flickering light, were just tricks of my mind. But that feeling lingered, heavy and unyielding, like something had taken root in the quiet spaces of that house, watching and waiting. The town was small, hidden away at the edge of a forest, surrounded on all sides by dark, towering trees that felt ancient, watching, almost alive. It wasn't the sort of place people stumbled upon by accident. No highways ran through it, no signs pointed the way. And on rainy nights, it was as if the town itself disappeared, hidden behind curtains of mist and shadow. I came here hoping for a fresh start, far from the crowds and the noise, a place where I could think and breathe, where everything would be simple again. My new home was a small house just off the main road, close enough to the forest that at night, I could hear the trees creak as they swayed in the wind, their branches reaching like fingers across the sky. It didn't take long to notice that something about the place felt off. The locals were polite enough, but there was an edge to their politeness, a reluctance that seemed to hide just below the surface. When I asked about the town's history or mentioned the forest, they would look away or change the subject, as though they didn't want to talk about it, as though they knew something I didn't. But I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just reading too much into things, that maybe they were just wary of newcomers. I kept to myself, spending my days unpacking, settling into the rhythm of my new life. And then, one night, the rain came. It was a deep, steady rain, falling in thick sheets that drummed against the roof, turning the world outside into a blur of shadows and sound. I stood by the window, watching as the rain soaked the ground, listening to its relentless, rhythmic patter. The world outside seemed so quiet, so empty, as if the rain had washed everything else away. And that's when I saw it, the light. At first, it was just a faint glow, barely visible through the trees at the edge of the yard. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but it was too far away, too obscured by the rain. I thought maybe it was just a reflection, a trick of the light. But then it started to move. The light swung back and forth, like a lantern swaying in the breeze, drawing closer, and then receding, disappearing behind the trees and reappearing just a little closer each time. I couldn't tell if it was someone walking through the forest or if it was something else, something moving in a way that no person would. For a moment, I stood there, frozen, watching as the light drew closer, inch by inch, its path strange and winding, as though it were searching for something, or it's someone. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a neighbor, perhaps, or maybe even an animal caught in the glow of a distant streetlight. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was no one else out there, no one who would be wandering through the forest on a night like this. And yet, the light moved, steady and unyielding, growing closer with each swing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned away from the window, stepping back into the shadows of my living room, hoping that whatever was out there wouldn't see me, wouldn't know I was watching. But even as I moved away from the window, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a heavy, prickling sensation at the back of my neck, an instinct that told me to stay hidden, to keep quiet. The light disappeared, but the feeling remained, lingering in the air, thick and suffocating. The night after that first sighting, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, listening to the rain, every sound amplified in the quiet darkness. The light in the woods haunted me, flickering in my mind each time I closed my eyes. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a trick of the storm, the stress of moving to a new place. But deep down, I knew there was something more, something I couldn't just ignore. By the next morning, I couldn't shake it. There was this gnawing feeling in my stomach, a question that demanded answers. So, I decided to do some digging. I started by asking around town, mentioning the light in the forest casually, as though I were merely curious. But every time I brought it up, I was met with silence, uncomfortable looks, or a quick change of subject. It was as if no one wanted to acknowledge it, as if the light and the forest were subjects best left alone. I realized then that if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. So, I headed to the only place I thought might hold some clues, the town library. The library was an old, dusty building on the edge of town, filled with that peculiar smell of aged paper and ink. It was empty, save for an elderly woman at the front desk, who glanced up at me with wary eyes as I walked in. When I asked her if there were any records of the town's history, she seemed hesitant, almost reluctant. But eventually, she led me to a small room at the back, where old newspaper clippings, photographs, and town records were kept. I spent hours sifting through the stacks of faded papers and yellowed photographs, piecing together fragments of the town's past. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Stories, rumors, whispers of strange occurrences that all seemed to happen on rainy nights, just like the one I had experienced. There were old clippings about people who had vanished, always during storms. Men, women, even children, who had simply disappeared without a trace, leaving behind nothing, but unanswered questions and grieving families. Some called it a curse, others a punishment. But there was one name that kept appearing over and over, like a shadow cast over the town's history. The Rain Watcher. The Rain Watcher. According to legend, it was an old spirit, a figure bound to the forest, cursed to wander on stormy nights, searching for lost souls to take with it. Some said it was a warning, others claimed it was an omen of death. But everyone seemed to agree on one thing. When the rain came, the Rain Watcher would appear, drawn to those who dared to wander too close to the woods. I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine as I read. The dates of the disappearances matched the pattern of storms, aligning perfectly with nights like the one I'd just experienced. It felt almost as if the town itself was hiding something, a dark truth buried beneath layers of rain and silence. And as I sat there, lost in thought, I felt an odd sensation, a prickling at the back of my neck, as if I wasn't alone. I glanced around, expecting to see someone, maybe the old librarian, hovering nearby. But the room was empty, the silence almost deafening, broken only by the faint hum of rain outside. Yet the feeling remained, growing stronger, as if something was standing just behind me, reading over my shoulder. It was late, and the storm had settled in fully, a relentless downpour that soaked the world outside in shadows. I sat by the dim light of a candle, watching the flames dance, listening to the drumming of the rain against the roof. It had been hours since I'd returned from the library, but the unease I felt only grew stronger as the night went on. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling or the wind pushing against the walls. But then, the lights flickered once, twice, and then they went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I was alone, surrounded by shadows, my only light the flickering candle on the table. The air felt damp and heavy, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I could feel each drop of rain as if it were inside the house, the walls closing in, damp and cold, as if the storm itself were trying to creep in. And then I heard it, faint, almost like a trick of my mind. Soft, deliberate footsteps outside my window, moving slowly, pausing as if waiting, as if listening. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to hear over the rain, telling myself it was just an animal, some stray creature passing by. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, pacing just outside the window, as if something was waiting for me to make a sound, to give myself away. The candle flickered wildly as a gust of wind slipped through the cracks, and for a moment, the room grew darker, the shadows stretching and shifting, taking on shapes that felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was standing just beyond the glass, hidden by the rain, waiting for me. And then, over the sound of the rain, I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind, slipping through the silence like a shiver down my spine. It was impossible to make out the words, just a low, murmuring voice, speaking from somewhere I couldn't see, couldn't reach. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I found myself standing, my feet moving toward the door as if drawn by some invisible force. The house felt colder with each step, the air thick with dampness and dread. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking, barely able to keep my grip. I stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking me instantly, my clothes clinging to my skin as I peered into the darkness. The world felt muffled, the rain drowning out all sound, reducing everything to shadows and shapes that shifted with each gust of wind. And then I saw it. There, just beyond the edge of the yard, a figure stood. It was barely visible through the sheets of rain, a dark silhouette, motionless, watching. I could feel its gaze, cold and unyielding, piercing through the shadows, as if it could see straight through me. I wanted to call out, to demand an answer, but my voice caught in my throat, my fear freezing me in place. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, an unmoving shadow, waiting. And then, just as I gathered the courage to take a step forward, it vanished. One moment it was there, and the next gone, swallowed by the rain, leaving nothing but the empty darkness and the relentless pounding of the storm. Back inside, I bolted the door, locking out the cold, the rain, and whatever, or whoever, it was that I'd seen. My hands were trembling as I leaned against the door, struggling to steady my breathing, to convince myself that I was safe now. But the silence in the house felt oppressive, thick with something I couldn't name. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Then I heard it, a slow, rhythmic dripping sound, like water slipping through a crack in the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just the storm, maybe a leak in the old pipes. But as I listened, it grew louder, sharper, as if each drop were hitting the floor with a purpose, resonating through the silence. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just the rain. But then, there were footsteps. I froze, every muscle tensing as I strained to listen. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving down the hall toward me. I held my breath, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, that there was no one here but me. But with each step, my heart beat faster, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. I could feel it, a presence, standing there, waiting. I took a step back, my eyes fixed on the door handle, half expecting it to turn, to see the door creak open, revealing. I didn't know what. Shadows seemed to stretch across the floor, every corner of the room darkening, as if the house itself was closing in. I moved slowly, my feet shuffling against the floor, inching my way toward the living room. I tried to calm myself, to push away the fear, but every shadow seemed to flicker, every sound amplified by the storm raging outside. It was as if the walls were whispering, each creak and groan sending chills down my spine. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint shadow passing by the window, lingering just long enough to make me doubt myself. What would you do if you felt eyes on you in your own home? If every sound, every shadow, hinted that you weren't as alone as you thought? I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, a stranger in my own home, haunted by something I couldn't see, couldn't understand. And that's when I saw it. Something poking out from beneath one of the floorboards, a corner of old, yellowed paper. Almost against my will, I knelt down, my fingers prying at the loose board, pulling it free. There, hidden beneath the floor, was an old photograph, worn and faded, as if it had been buried there for years. I brushed the dust away, squinting in the dim light to make out the image. It was a man, standing right there in that very room, staring into the camera with a distant, almost haunted expression. He looked familiar, like I'd seen his face somewhere before. And then I remembered, this was the man I'd read about at the library, the previous owner of this house, the one who had disappeared during a storm, just like this one. But there was something else, something in the background, barely visible through the grainy photograph. Standing behind him, almost hidden by the shadows, was a figure. It was just a faint outline, blurred by time and shadows, but it was there, watching, waiting. And in that moment, I knew. It was the same figure I'd seen outside, the same one that had followed me, haunting me, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. The rain pounded harder, each drop hitting the roof like a drumbeat, relentless, almost deafening. I could feel it pulsing in my ears, the storm growing fiercer, as if something was pushing it, urging it to drive me out. My heart raced, and every nerve in my body screamed that I needed to leave. But something stronger, something I couldn't explain, held me there, rooted to the spot. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being drawn out, called almost as though the rain itself wanted me to step outside, to face whatever lay beyond the threshold. I knew then that there was only one way to end this. I had to confront it, whoever or whatever it was standing out there in the dark, waiting for me. The figure that had been following me, watching me, its gaze cutting through every shadow, every flash of lightning. I opened the door, the wind whipping through, cold and wet, stinging against my skin as I stepped out. The rain soaked me immediately, plastering my clothes to my skin, my hair falling in wet strands across my face. But I barely felt it, my eyes locked on the yard ahead, where the shadowy figure waited, barely visible through the sheets of rain. I took one step forward, then another, my eyes never leaving that figure. As I drew closer, the darkness parted, and I saw him. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some spirit haunting my steps. Standing there, rain pouring down over him, was the man from the photograph, the previous owner of this house, the one who had vanished so many years ago. But he was changed, barely recognizable, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow as if they had seen too much, as if they had been emptied by years of solitude and despair. I couldn't believe it. He was alive, or at least he looked alive, but he was more like a shadow, a figure stripped of life, barely a whisper of what he once was. He stood there, watching me with those empty eyes, rain streaming down his face, and I realized he wasn't here to harm me. He was here to warn me. He raised his hand slowly, gesturing toward the house, his voice barely audible over the storm. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, each word weighed down by years of suffering. "This place, it's bound to the rain. Once it calls you, it never lets you go." I stared at him, my heart pounding as the weight of his words sank in. He was cursed, doomed to wander this place, forever bound to the rain watcher of the town's legend. And every time someone new moved in, he was forced to appear, a warning to those who dared to live here, a part of the curse that held him captive. "You need to leave," he murmured, his gaze fixed on mine, pleading. "If you stay, you'll be next. The rain will take you, and you'll vanish just like I did, lost to the storm, bound to these walls forever." I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The storm seemed to press down on me, the weight of the curse sinking into my bones, as if the rain itself were trying to pull me down, to claim me. I took a step back, my eyes never leaving his. And in that moment, I knew he was telling the truth. This place, this house, this storm, it was cursed, and if I didn't leave, I'd be lost to it, just like him. His words echoed in my mind, a warning wrapped in sorrow and finality. "You're next." The truth clawed at me, the realization that if I stayed, if I even hesitated for a moment longer, I'd be lost to this place, bound to the storm just as he was. I ran, my feet splashing through the puddles that seemed to grow deeper with every step. My heart thundered as loud as the storm, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I threw myself into the car, fumbling with the keys, hands shaking. I needed to leave, now, before the rain claimed me too. The wheels skidded on the slick road as I pulled away, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. But as I turned onto the main street, the rain intensified, pounding down like a curtain, reducing my visibility to mere inches. I could barely see, barely breathe. My only thought was to keep going, to drive as fast and as far as I could. But every turn, every road that should have led me out seemed to lead me back. I turned left, then right, then left again, but it was as if the streets had changed, twisting back toward the house, the town swallowing me whole. And with each passing second, the rain grew heavier, rising up over the tires, filling the roads until they were impassable. The roads were flooded, the water spilling over the edges, trapping me here, forcing me to turn back. My heart pounded as I realized I had no way out. Every path led back to the house. It was like the storm itself was alive, a living, breathing entity with one purpose: to hold me here, to drag me back into its embrace. I circled the town, again and again, my mind spinning, each dead end filling me with dread. I tried to find a back road, an alley, anything that would lead me away, but it was useless. The storm had claimed this place, claimed me, and every time I tried to escape, I found myself closer, circling back to the house, to him. And then I heard it, his voice, soft and mournful, whispering over the rain. "You're one of us now. They say that some secrets cling to a place, binding it to the past, tethering it to those who dare come close. And sometimes those secrets take something back in return." If this story kept you on edge tonight, then don't wander too far. There are more tales lurking in the dark, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. So, if you're ready to face your fears, make sure to subscribe for more nightly horrors. And tell us, do you believe that some secrets are meant to stay buried? Or would you have the courage to uncover what lies beneath?